Students Empowered to Independency is pleased to present The Cannabis Deception and would like to thank Mimic for sponsoring this important program.
I had some of the most scary experiences I've ever had, ever.
So when I talk to kids, they're using, every day, twice a day. Some kids are smoking all day long.
They're just losing their soul.
It's going to get worse.
It was like the harder that I screamed or hurt myself, the more I was going to come back to life.
So this idea of marijuana is just pot and it's just the old, weed that we used in college or something different about it is a deception.
I think there's deception, and I also think above all there is a lot of public misinformation and lack of knowledge about the drug.
2/3 of Maine teens believe cannabis is safe to use, and use rates steadily rise after entering high school, potentially matching Maine's adult use rates of 40% by the time they graduate. This alarming trend exceeds use rates in other states like Colorado, which was the first state to legalize. As a result, Seed is producing a third hour of programming on cannabis and has bolstered its featured guests to include several prominent experts who have been recognized internationally regarding cannabis science and policy. Dr. Bertha Mardris is professor of microbiology at Harvard Medical School. In 2015, she submitted a report to the World Health Organization entitled Update of Cannabis and Its Medical Use. She was appointed as one of 6 members of the President's Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and the Opioid Crisis. Dr. Kevin Sabet is president of Smart Approaches to Marijuana and the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions. He has studied, researched, written about, and implemented drug policy for more than 20 years and is a former 3-time White House Office of National Drug Control policy advisor. Dr. Ken Finn has practiced pain medicine in Colorado for 27 years and is president of the American Board of Pain Medicine and the editor of the first U.S. medical textbook, Cannabis in Medicine, an Evidence-Based Approach. Tonight, you'll also meet some Mainers on the front lines, medical experts and educators, as well as adults and students who have their incredible personal stories to tell.
I think marijuana is today's most misunderstood drug. We've all heard about the harms, rightfully so, of fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, crack, alcohol, and tobacco, which are our legal drugs that cause more death and destruction than all the illegal drugs combined. But that's partly because they're legal and they're marketed and commercialized. And marijuana is going down that path now federally and statewide. And I worry about it because people are underestimating its dangers. They're thinking this is the old marijuana. Now, the new marijuana is a completely different drug. We're talking 99.9% THC in some cases. THC is, of course, what gets you high. It's the active ingredient. And so we're seeing levels of impairment, levels of addiction, and levels of injury and poisonings in ways that nobody could have predicted even 10 years ago. And I think a lot of Mainers were duped into this idea that this is old marijuana. It didn't hurt us as the baby boomer generation. So why would it hurt our kids? And it's a free country anyway. But what young people are experiencing today is a completely different situation with this drug. It is a completely different drug, essentially, than what was used in the past.
Based on all of my knowledge and everything I know, I believe there may be components of the plant that may have pain relieving qualities. The problem is, and that's based on scientific molecular data, scientific information, but when you translate that science on the THC molecule and translate it into real life evidence, it doesn't work.
Many people believe that medical marijuana can be used to help control pain. However, legalization in Maine has resulted in a largely unregulated commercial drug enterprise which markets highly potent THC products to an unsuspecting population.
If you're looking at the scientific literature on the use of cannabis in pain, the science is very weak, especially when you're looking at dispensary cannabis.
But generally speaking, we're in this very, very large social experiment which is fraught with a lot of risk.
Having this shop has exposed me to a great variety of patients and cannabis needs. Working with younger people has been a little bit challenging due to the stigma and the extra care that's needed in overseeing their treatments. And we all know that kids have developing brains. They're not meant to have all these different substances in their bodies.
So we have normalized, we've medicalized, and when young people were asked why are they using marijuana more, they say, it's a medicine. Therefore it has to be safe. It's been approved. That's one of the great misrepresentations of the industry. But the evidence for marijuana as a medicine is weak. It's thin. A lot of it is self-reports. It is not based on rigorous FDA-style drug approval processes.
The marijuana industry has done such a good job to basically push people into the shadows, push the science into the shadows, and make you think like maybe there's something wrong with you, that you're actually saying that this could be harmful, even though when you look at the medical literature, when you look at the journals, when you talk to the scientists that are looking at this, when you talk to the parents that are being, affected by this and the families, there's no doubt that this can be harmful for some people. It doesn't mean it's harmful for everyone. And I think there's also some of that backlash. People, oh, well, if we say something bad about it, we're going to be labeled as reefer madness from the 1920s and 30s. And, we're going to be seen as these backward thinking Neanderthals. When in reality, it's totally the contrary. It's the fact that the science could not be clearer now about the potential dangers.
The problem we face in medicine nowadays is that the society has deemed cannabis as a medicine. They've also said that it's natural and it's safe. And of course, it's legal in Maine. We never endorse cannabis as a medicine. It's never been studied as a medicine, only anecdotally. And that's something that I think is really hard to overcome in the public.
But for someone who's looking for a higher dosage, they can use some of the concentrated products and put it in this device and inhale it.
Correct. Using the concentrated oils is preferable for a lot of people because they can use less of it. It's fearful for some people because that's the high THC. In one gram you may have 700, 800 milligrams of THC in a gram of oil. For most people who use it, they're using just a small little bit. That's why they call it a dab, because they're just putting a little dab, and that's all they need.
Okay.
Can it be abused? Absolutely.
So in a lot of ways, crack cocaine is to powder cocaine as the dabs and the waxes are to today's marijuana. But it's actually much worse than that, because crack cocaine is simply cocaine and some baking soda that you bake into an oven so that you're able to have a rock instead of a powder that you can smoke. And smoking is more important to people who want to get high than inhaling through your nose because it hits your brain faster. That's the difference between crack and powder cocaine. There's a difference, but it's more in the kind of way that it's prepared. In the way that dabs and waxes are compared to marijuana being inhaled, in a cigarette, in a joint, is totally different than that. We're not adding one or two little things. We're actually extracting only the THC. We're leaving the terpenes, the flavonoids, the other cannabinoids aside, and we're extracting only the THC, and we are inhaling it in a way that we never have before. That is so different than marijuana.
And what we do know, and know really, really well, is that people who are young, whose brains haven't fully developed, are at real risk to the downsides and risks of cannabis. And that includes, on average, an 8-point reduction in intelligence quotient, IQ. This is super powerful stuff, which is 25 to 30% THC by weight. And that dose, that high dose, has profound impacts on developing brain.
I understand that in Maine, 95% of marijuana sold is high potency. That is so dangerous for the population of Maine. Why? because high-potency marijuana is associated with more psychosis. It's associated with a more rapid onset of addiction. And there are no scientific papers or evidence that the higher potency benefits anybody. All we know is that the higher potency makes things worse.
401 South Palm 1083, Preble by Willard. How we doing?
Good, you?
Drove a little fast out of that lot,
Yeah,
don't you think?
I know.
What's going on?
A little scared.
Why?
That's all. I don't know.
All right, turn around.
Yep.
You're gonna be under arrest for OUI.
The alcohol was a major problem, but the pot was even more of a problem. So I was 13 when I first started smoking weed. I was in 8th grade, and all of my friends have older siblings that are all in high school, partying, doing this and that. So I would go over to their house, and their older siblings would be like, hey, do you guys want to come to a party with us? And of course we're gonna be like, yeah, the older kids, they're cool. Let's go hang out with them. So we would go hang out with them, and that's when I'm seeing all the drinks go around and the blunts getting passed and bongs getting handed around. And they're offering us if we want to try. And of course I'm gonna say, yeah, I want to be known as the cool 8th grader that's doing this stuff with high schoolers. So I tried smoking weed. And right after that first hit, I was just like, this is my thing. This was created for me. I need this in my life.
I realized at 16, when he got his first arrest for medical marijuana, that he needed help, that he was turning into an addict, just like so many people that my life has been surrounded by.
It doesn't matter like how old you are, 16, 17, 18, under 21. Just nowadays you have so many resources to go get it for you. Either friends that are actually over the age of 21, friends that are 18 that just got their med card so they're legal.
So I have some examples of the dab pens and the vape pens that we've confiscated at school over the years. And so, I know that some of you are familiar with them, but some of you might not be. And this was one of the cartridges one of my custodians found in the girls' restroom, and she thought I, was interesting. And on the back of this, it says Purple Rain Indica, but the total THC in this is 82.73%. Marijuana in the 80s and 90s was anywhere from 2 to 5%, 2 to 5% THC. And then right around the turn of the century, genetic engineering, people, she called it the botanist, we started hybridizing, highly concentrating the marijuana to be now it's about 18 to 25% in the flower. So the flower stuff would be like the skunky smelling stuff that people would need a joint or a bowl or a blunt for. But if you're smoking, or if some people are smoking out of the vape pens or the dab pens, this oil here, that comes in these cartridges like that, most people aren't using 20% in here. It's 45, 50, 55, 60, 82. It can go up to as high as we've seen is about 95% THC. And I think we're, as a society, we're not doing a strong enough job of educating our young people, educating our parents on how different these devices are and what these devices use as their substance. The concentration of cannabis is just out of control. And the higher the dose, the higher the concentration of the THC, the more likely we are seeing the drug-induced psychosis and the diagnoses of illnesses like schizophrenia.
Studies have shown that 1 in 6 kids who start using marijuana before age 18 become addicted. And for daily users, the risk of addiction rises to 50%.
I started smoking weed every day, and how early I was doing it in the day started creeping earlier and earlier and earlier. I just remember feeling so horrified by the way I looked. And I just went into my dorm room and cried the rest of the day because I had just kind of given up on myself. I had been trying to stop, and I couldn't.
There's more daily use amongst young people than ever in our history. It is the brain that I think we have to focus on and how it damages it both subtly and significantly.
Right now in 2024, the raw number of people using everyday marijuana exceeds those who are daily drinkers. That is an incredible statistic, an incredibly depressing statistic. So since the normalization of marijuana, we're now at a point that marijuana has exceeded alcohol in terms of daily, near daily use, and we have almost 50% of those people who used in the last month actually are using it every day. So alcohol, 10%. 1 in 10 drinkers use every day. 1 in 2 past month marijuana users use every day. And that's probably maybe even an underestimate. And that level has just grown dramatically, precipitously, exponentially in the last 15 years.
It was mostly, okay, that time of the day is here, I want to smoke. I was still developing a habit. I was smoking like as soon as I wake up. I was doing meditation in the morning for 1 hour, and I could smoke before that. And after meditation, smoke another blunt. Then you go to shower. Then basically you got to a point before doing anything. Shower, cooking, getting out of the house, coming at home, going to bed. Every activity was being preceded by a big old blunt. I realized I was spending a lot of money on weed. Like every time I could sit down with my wife and we budget, it's like, how much are you spending on weed? It's shameful. It's like literally, we're looking at an ounce a week, so $300 a week, between $200 and $300, depending on where you sourced your herb. I would say I am addicted to marijuana.
So a lot of what I talk to parents about is there's a dose-dependent relationship related to the risks of marijuana in particular. So that means the earlier you start using, the more often you use it, the higher potency you use it, and the longer you use it, I'll increase your risk.
So the fact that now we have studies saying of 25 risk factors, including easy access, including healthcare, completely controlling for demographics, controlling for mental illness like depression and anxiety and psychosis and past schizophrenia and suicidal thoughts. I mean, all of these things that are major predictors of substance use. Actually, the one thing that stands out more than all of those other risk factors, according to all kinds of research, is marijuana. And people don't want to talk about that because they think that means you're saying that if you used marijuana today, you're going to go use fentanyl tomorrow. That's not what it's saying. It's saying that if you're under 18 and you are using marijuana, especially regularly, your risk for using other drugs, other opioids, exponentially increases. And it increases in a way higher rate than those other things.
In the CDC's 2019 Youth Risk Survey, marijuana was the #1 predictor of whether teens also abused opiates in the last month.
It turns out that marijuana feeds an opioid use disorder, not the reverse.
In the last year, I had 2 students overdose, and they left us. I teach at a school that's smaller, and my school has a population of about 100 kids. I would say out of that 100 kids, 95 of them at least smoke weed on a daily basis. They don't want to smell like weed when they're at school, so they're dabbing, they're using edibles, and they're using it at concentrates so high that they cannot function if they are not high.
Very few people start their substance use disorder life with heroin. Rather, they may be initiated into alcohol or cannabis with a friend or even a family member. And that starts the journey of them feeling better on a substance. Perhaps there is a sense of distress. So this generation of young people are not as capable of modulating and controlling their distress, and that puts them at greater risk of using substances. Giving them stronger and stronger substances to use really puts them behind the 8 ball.
Kids just drop, they go away. You don't hear from them, they don't ask for help. They are in a state of depression that's so lengthy and so vivid that they are just gone. They walk in just like a zombie. They don't have color to their face. They probably haven't showered for a couple of days. Things that are so normal that we take for granted as adults, like showering, hygiene, brushing your teeth, having eyes that look awake, being able to smile with your eyes. I can't remember the last time I saw a kid smile with his eyes. Yeah, so it's to the point where they're just losing their soul.
So we know that year by year by year, we have an increased number of opioid overdoses and drug overdoses across the country. And that strongly correlates with more states legalizing for both medical and recreational purposes.
So psychosis is what's considered a thought disorder, and so people can have psychotic symptoms for all kinds of reasons, and there's all kinds of dyspsychotic symptoms. So the thing that people normally think about is hearing voices, seeing things that aren't there, but there's actually a lot of different kinds of psychotic symptoms, including disorganization, not being able to tell reality from fantasy, thinking you're living in a movie. I have people that have tactile hallucinations that feel that they have spiders crawling up and down their arms. I have people that have paranoid delusions. They, think the CIA is after them, think people are after them, see their faces change. So there's all kinds of different symptoms that people can have.
But something had flipped in my brain. I don't know what, but I just wasn't processing it the same. And whenever I'd smoke it, I'd become completely psychotic. Sometimes losing touch with reality, and I had some of the most scary experiences I've ever had, because I was just hallucinating faceless people, hearing whispers, becoming really convinced of bizarre things were happening. I had heard about how high-potency marijuana could cause psychotic symptoms. It just had never really done it to me before. I guess it was a bit of a surprise, and it was scary because I was afraid it wouldn't stop. I would just always feel like that. But the feeling would eventually go away, thank God.
So most of the people I see, like I've said before, have psychotic symptoms of some kind. And I would say, it's hard to say numbers exactly. I would say at least half, if not more, have definitely, I can see a direct link with using cannabis. I would say that it's getting to the point that it feels like most people, there's some kind of linkage. I don't want to say an exact number because we haven't actually run the numbers in our clinic, but I will say that we all find it unusual now when we have somebody when that's not the reason. And, it's also linked to people developing these symptoms earlier in life and these illnesses earlier in life, and there's a worse prognosis. Their path along with this disease is going to be worse if it starts younger.
I've first been just drinking pretty heavily, and I had been sort of avoiding weed because it was making me feel weird right before I had gotten sober. And then the drinking wasn't going well, so I started to replace it with smoking weed. And it was just making me feel so weird and have panic attacks and just feeling like I was in a video game. Just as simple as crossing a road when I was in that headspace. I was seeing the cars and they just kind of looked wrong, they didn't look real, and I stepped out in front of one of them one time.
One group of patients that really concerns us in mental health in Spring Harbor Hospital are teenagers, 14, 15 years old, who come into the hospital psychotic. For all the world, it looks like a first break for schizophrenia. They're having hallucinations, delusions, disordered thinking, all the classic symptoms. When we get them a little bit better so we can have a conversation, many of these kids are using cannabis excessively. So I would say that the majority of patients coming through Spring Harbor Hospital on the ICU have positive cannabis in their urine.
Of all the substances, and this is based on peer-reviewed medical literature, of all of the substances that can convert to psychosis, marijuana is the highest substance that has the conversion rate. I think 47% have potential to convert to psychosis, much higher than methamphetamine, cocaine, opioids, and alcohol.
So we are halfway through our first semester this fall at USM, and we are seeing a tsunami of students with mental health crises, ranging from anxiety and depression to suicidal ideation and an increase in cannabis use. So one of the other things that we're seeing really over the last 2 years is this group of students, smaller group of students who are showing signs of what we call cannabis-induced psychosis. So these are students that are having problems with paranoia. They're having problems with reality testing. They're describing kind of bizarre behaviors that they engage in. It's just, it's incredible. It's so worrisome that there's such a cavalier attitude that it's so helpful with everything without understanding its long-term impact and how it affects a growing and a maturing brain.
And people at risk for psychosis generally are people who have had family members with schizophrenia or other psychotic disturbances, or young people who are beginning to show at risk for psychosis behavior. Their grades go down, they become more introverted, they spend less time with friends, they spend less time taking care of themselves, perhaps they become disheveled, but they're not yet experiencing hallucinations or delusions. We know that those kids, particularly those with a family history of schizophrenia, are particularly at risk for the development of schizophrenia when exposed to high-potency cannabis.
Waiting for a UFO, thinking my dead father was coming, and waiting for my daughter to come in on a rainbow felt very normal. I remember every single feeling, but in that experience, it felt 1,000% normal. And I went to the emergency room and they did a brain scan and it was all apparently normal, but I didn't feel normal. I felt like I was really tapped into some other dimension and I was hallucinating. And I went to the hospital and they didn't do anything except go home and sleep and maybe stop taking edibles. And I did exactly what they said and I snapped out of it. I felt a little weird for the next few weeks, but I didn't touch edibles and I kind of came back to normal. Fast forward to last summer, I hadn't touched anything in a couple of years at least. And a friend said, hey, you want to try a gummy? I said, sure, it's been a while. I wasn't 100% clear that the previous episode was directly linked to the use of those edibles. But then last summer I took one edible and the effects were instantaneous. And again, I really lost touch with the reality I was in that day.
I have a friend who was here, smoked with me more than one blunt. Whoa, hundreds! He flipped. Big man is now in a mental hospital in Africa.
In 2023, the SEED team theorized that if overdosing on cannabis, which the kids call greening out, was a significant risk factor, then emergency department admissions would provide confirmation. SEED asked a major Maine hospital group to share emergency room data from 12 hospitals. The data showed that in 2022, those hospitals treated 5,258 patients for cannabis overdose. The two most common symptoms were psychosis and hyperemesis, which is uncontrolled vomiting. It's very troubling to know that 26% of these cases involve kids under 18, and that demographic was the fastest growing, having increased 53% from 2021.
The most important thing that I've heard from parents and from young people around the country is, why didn't I know this?
I thought that weed was this plant, this natural medicine, right? And that everything was fine. And it was not fine. And it triggered a mental break, like a real break from reality that was debilitating and caused a big, rupture in my life. So I didn't use weed, I didn't smoke in high school, and there were a couple people who did it, but I was really a little bit afraid. But then I went on a gap year to Israel to experience and to learn, and I went with about 50 American kids from all across the country, and some of these kids had been smoking weed for years. And I ended up smoking quite a bit on the program. By the end of the program, it was about daily. but it was much lower potency weed that we were getting in Israel, and it didn't really affect my brain and my mentality too much. I think I was less productive and maybe less like social or less goal-oriented, but I did not have any psychosis. And then I went to school in the fall, and it was actually right around the time that weed was legalized in Canada. And so it was perfect opportunity for me, a new weed smoker, to smoke more weed. And that's sort of where things started to go downhill. And so it just became my day-to-day, my escape and my social life was weed. It was everything. And I would like wake up and smoke in the morning, and that's kind of when I knew, I was like, oh, that was a little bit scary to me, because I'd never thought that I would get to that place really with weed. I was really psychotic. I was in Canada, my mom came, and I said, "Are you my mother?" And she said, "Yes, I am your mom." And I said, "Okay," and I believed her. I was in the hospital, and I had felt that I had become separated from my body. And in the hallway of the hospital, I saw this big, deep black hole that obviously wasn't there. I'd walked the hallway many times, sorry. And I saw this hole, and I was like, if I can somehow run and jump into the hole, then maybe I can reunite with my body that is somewhere else. So it was a combination of visual hallucinations and disordered thinking. As I was withdrawing from school, which was a whole process I had to do while I was psychotic, I saw spiders everywhere. But I was with the woman that I was withdrawing from school with, and she looked particularly like a spider, and her face looked like spider eyes, and it looked like there was a spider on her desk, and it was just terrifying. So that's always kind of been a fear of mine. I feel like it really took 3 years from the point of psychosis to start feeling confident, like a good amount more confident in my brain, such that I could start doing more things and doing school and making more friends. I'm used to the THC molecules and the receptors and the neurotransmitters and this and that. I'm used to this, and now it's gone, and it can be really difficult. And so I feel like it's really tough, because once someone has built that reliance, quitting can be almost impossible. If you're okay on it, and then you're really not okay off it, how do you get off it? And so I don't smoke. And now I've invented myself as someone who is proud of that, who's like, yeah, I'm hanging out, people are smoking weed, sorry, I don't do that. It's not me. I think people see the normalization of weed in pop culture, and I think that's a big part of why they're like, oh, it's just a normal thing anybody can do, totally fine. It's not the case.
There is an increasing body of evidence that marijuana use amongst young people is associated with increased suicidality, suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts, and suicide completions.
There is this big, thick pipe going across the ceiling of my room, and I decided to set something up to end my life with, and I knew it was gonna work. And I had it all set up, and I was trying to take that final step, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I ended up seeking more serious help during winter break.
And when you go to Colorado and you dig into those suicide numbers, you see that now marijuana, and it wasn't like this before legalization, but now marijuana is the #1 drug among young people who have died by suicide. We now see the research showing how today's marijuana, and this was not the case 30 years ago, but how today's marijuana is linked inextricably, very closely with suicide attempts and, unfortunately, those that succeed. And given that Maine is number 15 in the United States for teen suicides, That should be a wake-up call to us to look at the links. Of course, with all drugs and the other issues that are going on, it's not only one drug, but the one drug that stands out more than any other is marijuana. So we shouldn't be ignoring that in Maine.
I know that when I worked in the dispensary that my patients, after the high-potency THC concentrates came out, their behavior changed. There was like a big dark cloud that just descended over the dispensary. We would have customers that would have this rage at us. They had intermittent explosive disorder. They would get extremely upset. They would threaten to come to the dispensary and shoot us. Threatened to stab someone in the face, and I didn't know what was going on. I thought, this is so bizarre, because marijuana is known, or what the plant I knew was about mellow and peace and happiness, and that was not happening. I was seeing very dark energy from other users and patients. Well, I once thought that marijuana was very benign. It was a natural plant, I thought, until I consumed what are called the DABs, the high-potency THC concentrate. With the marijuana, the first time I did the dab hit, I just felt a tremendously more powerful effect than when I did cocaine. That was very powerful, and I wanted more. I absolutely wanted more of that. And my friends were very concerned, and they tried to say, look, we don't think this is right, you've changed, what happened? You used to just smoke a bowl, now what's going on, this is really bad and you need to stop. However, I didn't want to stop. I wanted to just do more, and I started doing a lot of concentrate just by myself. The neurological problems were getting worse, and I also started to experience these daydreams of committing violent acts. And I first thought about beating someone in the head with a baseball bat, and these were basically patients at the time who came in the dispensary and also coworkers. And then later, the thoughts were escalating. I thought about stabbing people, and then eventually shooting people with a gun. And while all this was going on, I was unfortunately still dabbing. And then for a while I thought about finding my CEO and torturing him and killing him. In my eyes, he wouldn't have been a human, so there would have been nothing wrong with that. And this went on for months. People noticed a substantial change in my behavior. I'm not a type of person who would ever resort to violence, but I was getting close. I had those knives on me. I was terrified. I thought I was justified that humans were not humans. They were the shape-shifting reptilians, and they were coming to kill me because I knew about the Illuminati conspiracy. I started to hate myself. At that point, what I didn't understand was I was experiencing cannabis-induced psychosis, which is paranoia and hallucinations. And I really wanted to just end my life because, unfortunately, my brain had been hijacked by high THC. And I saw the harms in other people, but I did not recognize the harms in myself. And people need to understand, when you're in cannabis-induced psychosis, you don't think you're in psychosis. You think what you're experiencing is reality.
It doesn't surprise me that she's talking about psychosis and imagining violence. We've dealt with it firsthand. If we're focusing just on cannabis, we have experienced individuals that I have seen start at 12 and are attacking police officers at 16, 17 years of age, violently.
Ian Hassel's cannabis-induced psychosis didn't end in violence, but meet Bryn Spacher, a young woman with limited exposure to cannabis. Bryn became violently psychotic on just a couple of hits of cannabis.
I've been evaluated by 4 different psychologists. They all say that I don't have mental illness before and even after this incident. So I would consider myself a very naive user when it comes to cannabis use. I didn't even know potency was really a thing, or nobody really discussed that with me before. I never had that knowledge to ask about it. I met Chad at the local dog park and we became friends, and it was only about 3 or 4 weeks that I've gotten to know him. On Sunday night of Memorial Day weekend, I was coming back from visiting some friends up north, and I decided to visit Chad last minute during that night. And we were just hanging out, and he proceeded to say that he needed to go smoke outside and smoke marijuana. So I decided to join him because I know he would smoke for a while. And I asked to have a hit. I smoked out of the bong for my first hit, and of course I was coughing and had a slight reaction. So he then said that he was feeling really high, and I told him, oh, I don't feel anything. Like per usual, I never really feel anything. So then he proceeded to say, well, let's make this next one really intense. And within seconds, unfortunately, I inhaled and took that second hit. So immediately I can tell this was so much stronger, and I was coughing harder, I was choking, I couldn't breathe. I felt like I needed to vomit. Eventually I started feeling dizzy, like really strong dizziness. I could not suppress any of these symptoms. I tried having a conversation with him, but nothing was making sense, nothing was logical. And I was just in like so much pain. And the last thing he said was to try and go to sleep. I wasn't sure if I was dead or not until I started to see visions where it felt like I was floating, and I saw my dead body on the porch, and that basically solidified that I'm dead. And then were some really horrifying visuals, and it felt like all I could see was like I was watching some TV of all these really horrible things happening. And there was no, like this whole experience, I was not able to perceive or interpret or do, like there was no thought, there was no emotion, there was no judgment, morality, what was right or wrong. And it's just a lot of bad images. I just saw a lot of bad images, and then at some point I was hearing voices to tell me to keep going, and it was like the harder that I screamed or hurt myself, the more I was gonna come back to life. And then the next thing I remember was waking up in the ICU room with injuries, not knowing what happened, how I got hurt, where was Chad, like I didn't know how I got there.
The police report showed that Bryn stabbed Chad 108 times, killing him. She then stabbed her dog, injuring it. And when police arrived, she was stabbing herself. Multiple tasings didn't stop her. It ended when a policeman hit her with a baton, breaking her arm.
I mean, it just felt like you didn't even know you were in this psychosis. Now that I know what this is, it's like you didn't even know you were in it, and you can't even will yourself out. Like you couldn't, like when you're sleeping and you have a nightmare, you can wake up from that easily. But this was not something that you're aware of, that you're experiencing, and you can't get out of it until it's over. And it's the scariest thing ever. I was in the hospital for probably about 4 days, and then I was arrested on June 1st, and I was in jail for about 6 days. At the preliminary hearing, it was discovered, or it was presented, that there was only THC in my system. Just like everyone else, I was like, how is that possible? How is it only THC in my system, yet this insane violence happened? Then when trial came and experts were testifying, there were 3 or 4 different experts that testified, and all unanimously agreed that this was solely due to cannabis-induced psychosis.
These are very dangerous products because we're in uncharted waters. We do not know what the long-term impact of these high-potency products are really going to be. Ian David Long is an example in Thousand Oaks, California, several years ago, was a mass shooter. He shot and killed 12 people, I think at the minimum. And I have his toxicology report in hand. And there was only one substance in his system, and it was THC. There was no illicit substances, no synthetic cannabinoids, alcohol, benzodiazepines, and he was a mass shooter. Kevin Neal from Northern California several years ago was a marijuana grower. Apparently didn't like his wife. I think he shot and killed her, stuffed her in a hole under their mobile home, didn't like a couple of neighbors, shot and killed a couple of them, went down the street to try to shoot up a school. And I think at least 4 people were killed in that instance. And I have his toxicology report. And there was only one substance on his drug testing, and it was THC. Not synthetic cannabinoids, not alcohol or other illicit substances. I think we talked a little bit about Christine Kirk, who was a woman here in 2014. Shortly after legalization, her husband went out and bought a bunch of edibles and became acutely psychotic. There was no other explanation for his acute psychosis other than his ingestion of a large amount of THC edibles. And he became acutely psychotic. And so she got on the phone with 911 requesting help. And in the middle of her phone call, he had gone to the gun safe, pulled out a gun, and shot and killed her in front of their children. And now he's serving 30 years in prison. Blair Ness in Dallas was a 32-year-old father who brutally murdered his 16-month-old son in the middle of the day. I mean, there were skull fragments in the apartment. The apartment smelled like marijuana. And I have the child's autopsy report, who was stabbed dozens of times. And I have the dad's toxicology report, and there was only one substance in his system, and it was THC. 3 weeks before the Planned Parenthood shooter here in Colorado, we had the Halloween shooter who killed a military veteran, shot and killed 2 women, ironically, in drug recovery before the police shot him in downtown Colorado Springs. And I have his toxicology report. There was only one thing in his system, and it was THC. And so even though, I mean, not everybody, like I said, that uses THC has become a homicidal maniac, but it is a risk factor. Medical examiners and coroners are completely oblivious to the link between cannabis use and death. Medical examiners and coroners need to start reading the literature on the impacts of cannabis on multiple organ systems, including the heart and brain, because they need to account for that as a potential contributing factor to somebody's demise.
Dr. Finn says not all cannabis users become mass killers, but he's made it his mission to research and catalog when violence may have been caused by cannabis-induced psychosis. It's more frequent than you would think, and it's possible that Maine's own Marcel LaGrange will be added to the list. LaGrange randomly killed a Westbrook couple he did not know in front of their children in June of 23.
I know a lot of people don't believe or don't want to believe that marijuana or cannabis can be harmful at all, but if it's not being talked about, if we're not spreading this type of awareness or education, there's just going to be more and more and more psychosis stories. And it's just going to be really, really dangerous, especially when marijuana is legal and everyone assumes that it's just safe, and they don't even know what they're getting themselves into when they go to these dispensaries.
So we continue to see more and more acts of violence, bizarre behavior in the public, in private. This is something when I started in '97, we probably would have 5 or 6 what we would refer to as mental health calls a month. We're now dealing with about 10 a week, and this is a small community.
And so it really hurts me, it bothers me, like painfully, to see people do things that are damaging to them, especially when there's not the restrictions in place to help them, and they don't know what they're doing, that they think that things are safe. And so it's just really painful to watch people destroy their lives. Not only destroy their lives, but to destroy their parents' lives, their children's lives, destroy their relationships. I mean, I've just, not just marijuana, but I've seen addiction just destroy people's lives. And so it's really hard to watch.
When I'm driving around through town and I see cannabis shops on every corner, I see weed symbols, marijuana signs. I hear my son saying, "Oh, so-and-so turned 18, gonna go get his medic card now." I can't understand how this dangerous thing that is now stronger than anything I had ever seen when I was in high school is ever going to slow down. I see more and more younger kids that are going to be introduced to it, just like my son was, by their friends' older siblings.
And even if you think that you're just starting with smoking weed every day to try to calm down, it's going to end somewhere else. 90% of the time, it's going to end somewhere else.
So this idea of marijuana is just pot and it's just the old, weed that we used in college, something different about it, is a deception. The idea that this is about health and wellness is a deception. The idea that this isn't hurting your brain, especially if you're under 25, but even if you're over 25, is a deception. The idea that it's safer than alcohol is a deception. The idea that in its current form it's medicine is a deception. The idea that it, helps with mental illness, which is something that we hear a lot about, is a deception. So the whole thing around cannabis and the need for it to be legalized is a complete deception.
Let's put a ceiling on the potency of cannabis products. In other parts of the world, 10 milligrams per package is a very rational dose limit. In fact, we know that 8 milligrams of THC pretty much saturates receptors. Second, and I think most importantly, so much of this problem can be abated and mitigated by having an age limit of 25. And I realize 25 sounds like such an arbitrary number, but neurobiologically, that's when our brains have formed. But it's really important to know the harms, and we really do know, that the use of cannabis on a daily basis before age 25 in high-potency forms greater than 10 milligrams, for example, at a time, is associated with pure harm.
We can't abdicate responsibility for public health to the Treasury and expect good results. We just cannot. Thousands of kids go to the hospital every year, thousands, and nobody says a word.
And when you're saying go to the hospital, we're talking about cannabis overdose.
Yes.
And the risk or rate of cannabis overdose has gone up about 1,600% over the past 6 years.
We have no business selling a product that can cause psychosis, much less promoting it. If any other environmental toxin that could cause, or chemical that could cause psychosis, you would not sell it.
It led to me wanting to not live anymore and me needing it every day to just wake up and get out of bed. I had lost 35 pounds and my mom's just watching me get thinner and thinner and thinner, and she's trying to feed me and get me to eat, but I just won't eat because I have to be high. So a friend of mine took her own life a little while back, and after I told my mom that I've been attempting too, and all of that, my mom had her come over when I said, no, don't tell her. She came over, and the one thing she said to me was, if I could have done anything to save my baby girl and get her the help she needed, I would have done anything, but now I get to see her sit on my mantle. And I just lost it after that. I looked at my mom and I'm like, what am I doing to my mom? Like, my mom's taking photos of me in cop cars trying to teach me lessons, and I'm showing up late at night and crashing my car and just doing all this stuff, and it just wasn't worth doing that to her. So I thought about both of them and I chose to go away.
Kind of that moment.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was realization. Over the last 8 months, we have spoken to several thousand students and adults about high-potency THC, alcoholism, and addiction, and we think it's making a difference. Because I've had kids come up to me and talk to me and be like, hey, I've been a year. And I'm like, you keep going. Don't you feel so much better? You're a year sober. How do you feel? And they always say, I feel great. It's inspiring. Keeps me going with, I want to keep pushing forward and what I'm doing, staying clean, staying sober.
The brain is the repository of our humanity. And it's the one thing that separates us from all other life forms is our human brain, which enables it to write poetry and laws and literature and music and create rockets and iPhones and medicines. Everything comes from the human brain. And I consider this a defense of our brains. Certainly not a war on drugs. We just have to defend this beautiful brain of an adolescent child from being derailed.
I think that's what we have to keep talking about, is that it's a different product today. When we look at those examples of edibles that are 1,000 milligrams of THC, that's not the same as what we were talking about even 5 years ago.
Yeah, everything's changed now.
And the kids they were sharing that they had experienced some greening out. Some of them were talking about more like experiencing psychotic symptoms. This is about how we've normalized it for kids to think that it is safe and healthy when we have all this evidence that it's not.
Yeah.
It's just not the same product, even that it was 10 years ago.
And also, parents just think it's okay.
You know, it's not common knowledge how many people are hospitalized for this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, parents don't really know what to do or what to look for.
Yeah.
If they think it's the same weed that I grew up on, then they're not going to be looking for those red flags.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not going to be thinking that their kid is overdosing on cannabis. They don't think that is a thing that you can even do.
Yeah, it's scary. And I don't even think the kids know that, really.
Because that was the other thing that we talked about, is that most kids aren't paying attention to dose of anything that they're taking. Like, we were looking at we were having like soda or whatever, we were looking at how much caffeine is in this, how much sweetener is in this. The same with we look at nicotine, we were looking at the difference in the Elf bar to the cigarettes. Like, no one is looking at dose, they're just taking whatever they can get or taking what's handed to them. And it's really eye-opening when you look at how many milligrams of a substance you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that knowledge is gonna shift something for them or...
Well, it's gotten me thinking more.
And I think that's the average person will use a product and never look at the dosage. What did one kid say today? I'd rather not know. We were talking about like ignorance is bliss.
This is Bill Green. We thank you for watching and thank Memic for its sponsorship and Maine Public so that we might get this important information to you.